Umudike was a village of tradition, where lineage and wealth determined one's place in society. Nestled between vast forests and a winding river, it was a land of farmers, fishermen, and traders, all bound together by ancient customs. In this village, an orphan girl named Adama lived, though lived might have been too generous a word. She survived, barely. No one knew exactly where she had come from. Some said her parents had died in a fire that consumed their hut when she was a baby. Others claimed her mother had been a wandering woman from another land, abandoned by a lover who had never returned. Whatever the truth was, it didn't matter to the villagers. To them, she was simply the orphan, a girl with no lineage, no protector, and no future. Adama was no older than 15, yet her hands were rough from years of hard labor. She scrubbed pots for the village women, carried heavy bundles of firewood for the elders, and worked in the fields for a handful of grains. Despite her efforts, she was always underpaid, overworked, and mocked. "Why do you even try so hard?" one of the market women sneered one afternoon as she tossed a single yam into Adama's hands. "No matter how much you work, you will always be nothing." The laughter that followed stung, but Adama only lowered her head and walked away. She had long learned that arguing was useless. The villagers had decided her fate before she was old enough to speak. She was cursed. The whispers followed her wherever she went. "She brings misfortune. She is the reason the river dried up last season. If she fetches water from your well, throw the water away." Even the children were cruel. The village's rich children, led by Zubaida, the chief's only daughter, found entertainment in tormenting her. "Look at her," Zubaida laughed one morning, pointing at Adama's torn wrapper as she carried a bundle of wood on her head. "She dresses like a beggar." "Oh wait, she is one." The others joined in, laughing and clapping. Some even picked up small stones and threw them at Adama's feet, forcing her to walk faster. But Adama never spoke back or retaliated. Not because she was weak, but because she refused to become like them. Deep inside, she clung to a fragile hope that maybe, one day, her suffering would end. On some nights, when the weight of loneliness was too much to bear, Adama would slip away to the riverbank and sit on the smooth rocks, gazing at the moon's reflection on the water. She often whispered to herself, "Maybe I was meant for more." But such thoughts felt like a distant dream, too impossible for someone like her. That night, the sky was darker than usual, with only a handful of stars piercing through the thick clouds. The village had long gone to sleep, but Adama remained by the riverbank, dipping her toes into the cold water as she hummed a quiet tune. She had spent the day working in the chief's compound, scrubbing clay pots and sweeping courtyards, only to be paid with leftover millet that barely filled her stomach. As she prepared to leave, a voice called out from the shadows. "Adama." Startled, she turned to see a frail figure standing beneath an ancient baobab tree. Mama Ijibu, the oldest woman in the village, leaned heavily on her walking stick, her white hair gleaming under the moonlight. The villagers often spoke of her in hushed tones, saying she had lived for over 100 seasons and could see into the spirit world. Adama quickly lowered her gaze. No one ignored a summons from Mama Ijibu. "Come here, child," the old woman said, her voice thin but firm. Adama hesitated before stepping forward. Mama Ijibu's eyes, clouded with age, bore into hers with unsettling intensity. Then, in a voice that sent chills down Adama's spine, she whispered, "I have seen your future." Adama frowned. "My future?" Mama Ijibu nodded. "Yes. The spirits have spoken to me. One day, those who laugh at you now will bow before you." Adama blinked in surprise, then let out a soft, bitter chuckle. "Mama, that's not possible." The old woman smiled knowingly. "That is because you only see what is before you, not what is yet to come." She reached into the folds of her worn-out wrapper and pulled out a bracelet, a simple band of woven cowrie shells and tiny golden beads. Adama stared at it. "What is this?" "A gift," Mama Ijibu said, extending the bracelet toward her. "It will guide your destiny." Adama hesitated before carefully taking it. As soon as her fingers brushed against the shells, a strange warmth spread through her hands, traveling up her arms. She gasped. "You feel it, don't you?" Mama Ijibu said, smiling. Adama quickly dropped the bracelet, fear flashing in her eyes. "What kind of magic is this?" Mama Ijibu chuckled. "It is not magic, child. It is power." Adama stared at the bracelet, her heart pounding. She had never owned anything before, let alone something that felt alive. But she could not ignore the unease crawling up her spine. "Mama, why are you giving this to me?" she asked cautiously. "Because you are more than you think you are," Mama Ijibu said. "And when the time comes, you will understand." Adama swallowed hard. The old woman was known for her cryptic words, and tonight was no different. She picked up the bracelet again, this time slipping it onto her wrist. Instantly, a strange sense of calmness washed over her. Mama Ijibu nodded in approval. "Go home now, child. And remember, do not remove it." Adama nodded slowly before turning and walking away. But even as she made her way back to the village, she couldn't shake the feeling that, somehow, her life had just changed forever. The village of Umudike buzzed with excitement as the news spread. A grand festival was to be held. The aging king, who had ruled for many years, had no heir to take his place. The elders had decreed that the gods would decide the next ruler through a series of challenges, open to those deemed worthy. Everywhere, preparations began. Drummers practiced their beats, market women decorated their stalls, and warriors sharpened their spears in anticipation of the great event. It was all anyone could talk about, except for Adama, who knew she had no place in such celebrations. She had barely finished sweeping the front of the chief's compound when she overheard a group of villagers discussing the festival. "They say the winner of the challenges will be crowned king or queen," one man said. "A ruler chosen by the gods themselves," another added. Adama paused, her fingers tightening around the broom handle. A ruler chosen by the gods? For a brief moment, a ridiculous thought flickered in her mind. But she quickly pushed it away. She was a nobody. As if to remind her of this, Zubaida, the chief's daughter, appeared with her group of friends. They were dressed in bright, expensive wrappers, their hair adorned with golden beads. "You're still here?" Zubaida smirked, looking Adama up and down. "Shouldn't you be hiding in the shadows like the cursed rat you are?" The other girls giggled. Adama lowered her head, swallowing back the retort that burned on her tongue. It was always this way. No matter what she did, no matter how hard she worked, Zubaida found a way to humiliate her. "Do something useful," Zubaida continued, tossing a basket of dirty clothes at Adama's feet. "Wash these before sunset. And don't dare leave a single stain." Adama clenched her fists, but she picked up the basket without a word. As she made her way toward the river, she could still hear their laughter behind her. Tears stung her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. Not here. Not in front of them. By the time she reached the riverbank, the sun was dipping below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple. She dropped the basket beside her and sank onto a rock, staring at her reflection in the water. For the first time in a long while, she allowed herself to cry. She cried for the parents she had never known. She cried for the loneliness that never seemed to end. She cried for the life she wished she had but would never have. The sound of the flowing river was her only companion. "Maybe I was meant to be nothing," she whispered. But as she absent-mindedly traced a finger over the bracelet Mama Ijibu had given her, a strange feeling stirred in her chest. Maybe, just maybe, the old woman's words had not been a lie. The long-awaited festival of kingship arrived with the first light of dawn, bringing with it an air of excitement that had never before swept through Umudike. The entire village was transformed, colorful fabrics decorated every hut, fragrant smoke rose from cooking fires, and the rhythmic pounding of drums filled the air. Men and women dressed in their finest attire gathered at the village square, eager to witness history in the making. Today, the gods would choose the next ruler, and only the most worthy would rise to the challenge. At the center of it all sat the current king, an elderly man wrapped in fine robes, his face lined with years of wisdom. He watched from a carved wooden throne as the festival began. To his right, the village elders sat in a row, their expressions serious. This was no mere competition, this was destiny unfolding. Adama, as expected, had been forbidden from attending. "A girl like you has no place among rulers," the villagers had scoffed when she had asked about the event. Yet, despite the harsh words, she had found a way to watch from afar, hidden behind a tree near the festival grounds. The first part of the festival was a grand display of culture and tradition. Women in bright, flowing wrappers danced gracefully, their hands clapping in rhythm to the beats of the talking drums. The village griots sang praises of past rulers, reminding the crowd of the great kings who had come before. Then came the moment everyone had been waiting for. The village priest, draped in white, stepped forward and raised his staff. "The gods have spoken," he announced. 3 challenges will determine the next ruler, one of wisdom, one of courage, and one of heart. A murmur ran through the crowd. This was unlike anything they had expected. Most had assumed the strongest warrior would take the throne, but the gods demanded more. One by one, the contestants stepped forward. The first was Abika, the chief's eldest son, tall and broad-shouldered, with a spear strapped to his back. He smirked as the crowd cheered for him, already convinced that he was the rightful king. Next came Danzo, a wealthy merchant's son, known for his clever tongue and fine robes. He bowed dramatically, certain that his wit and charm would win him the crown. Behind them, several warriors and noblemen stepped forward, each believing themselves destined for greatness. Adama watched silently from her hiding place, her heart aching with longing. How she wished she could stand among them, not as a servant, not as a beggar, but as someone worthy. She tightened her grip on her bracelet. The priest's voice rang out once more. "Let the trials begin." The village square fell into a hush as the high priest stepped forward, his ceremonial robes billowing in the breeze. In one hand, he held a tall staff adorned with cowrie shells, and in the other, a carved wooden bowl filled with sacred white chalk. He drew a circle on the ground, marking the sacred space where the first challenge would take place. "The gods have decreed," the priest began, his voice deep and commanding, "that a ruler must first be wise before they are strong. Wisdom is a greater weapon than any spear, for it leads a kingdom in times of peace and war alike." The crowd murmured in agreement, eyes fixed on the contestants standing proudly in the circle. "For your first test," the priest continued, "you must answer a riddle. But be warned, only a true leader will find the answer." He lifted his staff and spoke. "A wealthy man dies and leaves behind 2 sons. To decide who will inherit his fortune, he tells them, 'Go to the market and buy something that can fill a house, but costs no more than a single cowrie shell.' What did the wiser son bring?" A deep silence followed. The contestants exchanged glances, their brows furrowed in thought. Abika, the chief's son, stepped forward first. "The answer is grain," he declared confidently. "A sack of millet can be bought for a single cowrie shell, and when poured out, it will cover the floor of a house." The priest shook his head. "That is not the answer." Danzo, the merchant's son, smirked and took a step forward. "The answer is feathers. Feathers are light and plentiful. A house can be filled with them easily." Again, the priest shook his head. "That is not the answer." One by one, the other contestants gave their answers: sand, water, ashes, even smoke, but each was met with the same response. "The gods remain unsatisfied," the priest announced. "None of these answers will truly fill a house in the way the riddle asks." A murmur of frustration spread through the crowd. Could it be that no one in the village was wise enough to solve the riddle? From her hiding place behind the tree, Adama listened carefully, her mind turning over the priest's words. Something about the riddle felt familiar. She had often been in houses that felt empty, not because they lacked grain or feathers, but because they lacked warmth. Before she could stop herself, she stepped forward. Gasps erupted from the crowd. "What is she doing here?" a villager hissed. "She is not one of the contestants," someone else scoffed. Zubaida and the other rich girls sneered, whispering among themselves. Ignoring them, Adama turned to the priest and, in a soft but steady voice, said, "The answer is light." The priest raised an eyebrow. "Explain." Adama took a deep breath. "A candle or a small lamp costs only a cowrie shell. But when you light it, it can fill an entire house with its glow. It takes up no space, yet it chases away darkness. A true leader brings light, not just wealth." For a moment, there was nothing but silence. Then, a collective gasp rippled through the crowd. The priest's gaze lingered on Adama before he slowly nodded. "The orphan girl has answered correctly." Shocked whispers spread like wildfire. "Impossible," Abika sputtered. "How can she be wiser than the warriors?" Danzo muttered. Even the elders, who had remained silent until now, exchanged glances of astonishment. But Adama lowered her eyes humbly, feeling the weight of their stares. She had not spoken to impress anyone, she had only spoken the truth. And yet, deep inside, she felt something stir. For the first time in her life, the village was looking at her differently. The sun hung low in the sky as the high priest raised his staff once more, signaling the beginning of the second challenge. The first test had already shocked the village. An orphan girl, uninvited to the festival, had proven herself wiser than the warriors. But surely, the next task would separate the strong from the weak. The priest's voice rang across the square. "The gods have chosen a second trial, a test of courage." He turned toward the sacred grove beyond the village, where an ancient forest stretched into the horizon. Its trees were gnarled and twisted, their roots thick with secrets older than the village itself. "Beyond this village lies the forbidden forest," the priest continued. "Inside, hidden among the tallest trees, is a golden feather from the legendary spirit bird. Whoever brings it back shall prove they are brave enough to rule." A murmur spread through the crowd. Everyone knew the stories of the spirit forest. It was said to be haunted, filled with unseen creatures and restless spirits. Few who entered ever returned. Some of the warriors hesitated, shifting uncomfortably. Even Abika, the chief's son, clenched his fists, masking his fear behind a scowl. One by one, the contestants made excuses. "I would go," one warrior said, "but I injured my leg during training." "It is foolishness to risk one's life for a mere feather," Danzo scoffed. "I have no fear," another man declared, though he made no move to step forward. For a long moment, no one dared to move. Then, a single figure stepped into the circle. It was Adama. Gasps erupted from the villagers. "What is she doing?" someone whispered. "She's just an orphan girl," another scoffed. "She'll never survive the forest," Zubaida muttered, shaking her head. But Adama did not waver. She remembered Mama Ijibu's words, "One day, those who laugh at you will bow before you." Maybe this was the path she had to walk. The priest gave her a long, measured look before nodding. "Then go, child. The gods are watching." With that, Adama turned and walked toward the forest. The moment she stepped beneath the ancient trees, the air changed. It was cooler, quieter, too quiet. No birds chirped, no leaves rustled. The trees seemed to lean inward, their twisted branches like skeletal hands reaching for her. Adama's heart pounded, but she kept walking, one careful step at a time. She had no weapon, no torch, only the bracelet Mama Ijibu had given her, which seemed to glow faintly in the dim light. Then, she heard it. A soft, melodic voice, like the wind singing through leaves. She turned toward a clearing, where a magnificent bird perched atop a low-hanging branch. Its feathers shimmered in shades of gold and silver, its eyes glowing like embers. Adama gasped in awe. The spirit bird. It tilted its head, studying her with an almost human intelligence. Then, to her shock, it spoke. "Why have you come, child of the earth?" Adama hesitated before lowering herself to her knees. She had nothing to offer but respect. "O great bird," she said softly, "the village seeks proof of courage. I was sent to bring back one of your golden feathers." The bird ruffled its wings. "And will you steal it from me, as so many before you have tried?" Adama shook her head. No. I would never take what is not given. The bird's glowing eyes narrowed. Then how will you get what you came for? Adama took a deep breath. By asking. The spirit bird was silent for a long moment. Then, slowly, it spread its great wings. A single golden feather drifted down, landing gently in Adama's outstretched hands. Go, the bird said, its voice like a whispering breeze. And remember, true strength is not in taking, but in knowing when to ask. Adama pressed the feather to her chest, overwhelmed with gratitude. She bowed deeply. Thank you. And with that, she turned and made her way back to the village, the golden feather shining in her hands. By the time she emerged from the forest, the sun had nearly set. Villagers gasped in disbelief as she walked into the square, the golden feather held high. She did it, someone breathed. No one has ever returned with the feather before, an elder whispered. Abika, Danzo, and the other warriors stared in stunned silence. Zubaida's face twisted in rage. This must be a trick. But the high priest raised his staff. The gods have spoken. This child has shown wisdom and courage, far greater than those who call themselves warriors. Adama stood tall, her heart pounding. For the first time in her life, they were no longer laughing at her. As the festival stretched into the late afternoon, the village hummed with restless energy. The first 2 challenges had already stunned everyone. An orphan girl had outwitted warriors and braved the haunted forest. But there was still one final test, though no one knew what it would be. The high priest remained silent, offering no explanation. The elders simply exchanged knowing glances. Even the warriors, once so confident, now shifted uneasily, waiting for the next challenge to be announced. But nothing happened. Instead, as the sun dipped lower, the contestants were given time to rest. The villagers set out food and drink, and small fires were lit across the square. Laughter and music filled the air once more, but there was an unspoken tension. Who would be tested next? And how? As the festival carried on, an old man appeared at the edge of the village. He was hunched over, his skin dark and wrinkled like the bark of an ancient tree. His clothes were tattered, his feet dusty from long travel. He walked slowly, leaning heavily on a wooden staff, his eyes filled with quiet suffering. The villagers noticed him immediately. Some sneered. Others muttered under their breath. Who let this wretched man wander into our festival? Someone scoffed. He should beg somewhere else, another said, waving him away. But the old man did not leave. Instead, he made his way toward the contestants, stopping near the fires where food had been laid out. His voice was weak but clear. Please. I have traveled far. I have not eaten in days. Will anyone share their food with an old man? The warriors and nobles looked at each other, then laughed. Danzo, the merchant's son, wrinkled his nose. Why should we waste our feast on a beggar? Abika scoffed, taking a large bite of roasted yam. If you are too weak to find food, old man, perhaps it is your time to die. The others chuckled, returning to their meals, completely ignoring the beggar. The old man sighed, shaking his head. He turned away slowly, his frail body trembling as if he might collapse. Then, Adama stepped forward. She had so little, no fine clothes, no family, no power. But what she did have was a heart that knew hunger. She had spent her life starving, struggling for scraps, watching others eat while she went without. She had begged before. She knew the pain of being ignored. So without hesitation, she reached into the small pouch at her waist and pulled out her last piece of food, a simple roasted plantain. It was all she had. She held it out with both hands. Here, grandfather, she said softly. It is not much, but please eat. The beggar's weary eyes met hers, searching her face. Then, slowly, he took the food. The villagers stared in disbelief. Why would she waste her food on him? Someone whispered. She has nothing, yet she gives away what little she has, another muttered. Abika snorted. Foolish girl. But Adama didn't care what they thought. She watched as the old man took a bite, chewing slowly, his tired body seeming to gain strength with each mouthful. And then, everything changed. A gust of wind swept through the village, making the fires flicker wildly. The air became thick, charged with an unseen power. The villagers gasped as the beggar straightened, his back no longer bent. His frail, wrinkled skin began to glow, his tattered rags transforming into flowing white robes. The beggar was no beggar at all. Before their eyes, he transformed into a tall, majestic figure, one of the ancestral spirits, the guardians of the land. His face was no longer tired but radiant with power and wisdom. A hush fell over the crowd. The spirit's voice was thunderous yet gentle, echoing through the village. The true ruler has been found. The villagers froze in shock. Danzo dropped his drink. Abika's face went pale. Even the high priest and the elders bowed their heads in reverence. The spirit turned toward Adama, his glowing eyes filled with pride. Many seek power, but few understand what it truly means to lead. You, child, have shown wisdom, courage, and most of all, a heart of kindness. He lifted his hands, and golden light swirled around Adama, wrapping her in a warm embrace. The village erupted into chaos. How can this be? Someone shouted. She is just an orphan, another gasped. This must be a mistake. Zubaida cried, eyes blazing with jealousy. But the spirit raised his staff, silencing them all. A ruler is not born from wealth, nor from strength alone. A ruler is one who serves, one who gives when they have nothing left, one who sees all people as worthy. He gestured toward Adama. She has passed the final test. And with those words, the sky itself seemed to rejoice, the clouds parting, golden sunlight pouring down onto Adama. The high priest, still kneeling, lifted his voice. The gods have spoken. Our new queen has been chosen. Adama could hardly believe it. She had spent her life in the shadows, mocked and ignored. And yet, here she stood, the villagers staring at her not with scorn, but with awe. She wasn't a nobody. She wasn't cursed. She had been chosen. And as the spirit vanished into the wind, the people of Umudike slowly bowed before her, one by one, lowering their heads in respect. Even those who had laughed at her, those who had kicked dirt in her path and whispered behind her back. They were bowing to the orphan girl. Adama took a deep breath, lifting her chin, her heart steady. She was no longer the girl who had nothing. She was Adama, Queen of Umudike. Adama could hardly believe it. She had spent her life in the shadows, mocked and ignored. And yet, here she stood, the villagers staring at her not with scorn, but with awe. She wasn't a nobody. She wasn't cursed. She had been chosen. And as the spirit vanished into the wind, the people of Umudike slowly bowed before her, one by one, lowering their heads in respect. Even those who had laughed at her, those who had kicked dirt in her path and whispered behind her back. They were bowing to the orphan girl. Adama took a deep breath, lifting her chin, her heart steady. She was no longer the girl who had nothing. She was Adama, Queen of Umudike. As the village buzzed with anger and doubt, a lone voice cut through the noise. Enough. The villagers turned as Mama Ijibu, the oldest woman in Umudike, stepped forward. The firelight flickered across her weathered face, her piercing eyes scanning the crowd. She was a woman respected and feared, one who spoke little but saw much. She raised her staff, and the murmurs died down. You all question the gods' decision, she said, her voice steady. But you do not know the full truth. The crowd exchanged uneasy glances. Even the elders, who rarely took orders from anyone, listened closely. Mama Ijibu turned to Adama, her expression unreadable. Child, it is time you learned who you truly are. Adama's heart pounded. Who I truly am. She had spent her entire life believing she was a nobody, a girl with no name, no family, no place in the world. But the way Mama Ijibu was looking at her now, it sent chills through her bones. The old woman took a deep breath, her voice lowering into something almost sacred. Your mother was not just any woman, she said. She was a lost princess of the Ajak kingdom. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Adama's knees nearly gave way. A princess? My mother? Mama Ijibu's eyes softened. Her name was Princess Ifedeo. She was the only daughter of the Ajak king, but she fled her kingdom when war broke out. Her enemies sought to destroy her family, and she escaped, pregnant with you. The villagers were frozen in shock. Even the chief sat in stunned silence. Zubaida's face twisted in disbelief. Lies, she spat. This is just a story. But Mama Ijibu ignored her. She was not done. Your mother arrived in this village alone, hiding her identity to keep you safe. But the war followed her. One night, the enemy found her, and she gave her life protecting you. Tears burned in Adama's eyes. She had never known her mother. Not even her name. And now she learned that her mother had died for her. Why had no one told her before? As if reading her thoughts, Mama Ijibu sighed. I kept the secret because it was not yet time. If the wrong people knew the truth, they would have killed you before you ever had a chance to claim your destiny. The village elders exchanged glances, their expressions uneasy. One of them, a man who had served the chief for years, spoke up. How can we believe this story? Mama Ijibu's lips curled into a small, knowing smile. Because the proof has been with her since the day she was born. She stepped toward Adama and, with surprising gentleness, lifted the sleeve of her ragged dress. There, on Adama's right shoulder, was a small but distinct birthmark, an intricate symbol, shaped like a crescent moon with a star in the center. A mark only carried by the royal bloodline of Ajak. The elders gasped. It is true, one of them whispered. That is the royal mark. The chief, who had remained silent, finally rose from his seat. His face was pale. Even he could not deny it now. The entire village exploded into noise. Some people cried out in awe. Others refused to believe it. This is impossible. She was royalty all along? Then the gods were never wrong. Even the warriors, who had mocked her, shifted uneasily. Zubaida, however, was shaking with rage. No, she screamed. This changes nothing. She is still an orphan. She is still nothing compared to me. But now, no one was listening to Zubaida anymore. Because the truth had finally been revealed. Adama was never just a poor orphan girl. She was born to rule. The night of the crowning ceremony arrived, and the village square shimmered with the glow of 1,000 torches. The air was thick with the scent of roasted meat and burning incense, the sounds of drums and flutes echoing through the trees. For the first time in her life, Adama was not invisible. The same villagers who once mocked her now bowed in her presence, whispering her name in awe. The elders had declared her the rightful queen, and now, all that remained was the sacred crowning ritual. But in the shadows, not everyone celebrated. While the villagers danced and feasted, a secret meeting took place in a dark hut near the edge of the village. The noble families and jealous warriors huddled together, their faces twisted with hatred. This cannot be allowed, hissed a nobleman, his gold rings glinting in the dim light. An orphan girl ruling over us? It is an insult. She was never just an orphan, another muttered. She carries royal blood. The head warrior, a towering man named Akin, slammed his fist on the wooden table. Royal blood or not, she is a nobody. If we let this happen, we will lose everything. A deadly silence followed his words. Then, Zubaida, the chief's daughter, smirked. There is a simple solution, she said smoothly, her voice dripping with venom. The men turned to her, listening closely. Zubaida leaned in, her eyes dark with malice. She cannot be crowned if she does not live to see the morning. The warriors exchanged glances. Akin nodded. It must be done quietly. No swords. No blood. One of the noblemen pulled out a small clay vial, filled with a dark, murky liquid. Poison. She will drink from the ceremonial cup during the crowning, he said. A single drop will end her before she ever wears the crown. They all nodded in agreement. Before sunrise, Adama would be dead. The ceremony began. Adama stood before the high priest, her heart pounding as she prepared to take the sacred oath. A golden goblet, filled with palm wine, was placed in her hands. The moment she lifted it, a cold hand grabbed her wrist. She turned, and met the sharp, knowing gaze of Mama Ijibu. "Do not drink." The old woman's voice was barely a whisper. Adama's breath caught in her throat. Mama Ijibu's face was grave. Without a word, Adama lowered the cup and let it slip through her fingers. The goblet hit the ground, spilling the wine into the dirt. A hush fell over the crowd. Then, a hiss, a crackling sound. The liquid bubbled, turning black as smoke rose from the ground. Poison. Gasps filled the air. The high priest turned, his eyes blazing. Who did this? Fear spread through the guilty faces in the crowd. The warriors shifted uneasily. The noblemen glanced at each other, their faces pale. But Zubaida did not move. She held her chin high, refusing to look away. Adama took a deep breath and stepped forward. The whole village waited for her to demand revenge. But instead, she spoke words that stunned them all. "I forgive you." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Ikeen, the head warrior, looked at her in shock. "What?" Adama's voice was steady. "You wanted to kill me because you feared losing your power." She looked at the nobles, the warriors, even Zubaida. "But I do not seek to destroy you. A true ruler does not rule through fear." Tears burned in Mama Ijibu's eyes. She knew now Adama was truly ready. At that moment, the sky above them shimmered. A soft, glowing light descended, a golden bird, the same mystical creature that had given Adama the feather during the trials. The bird circled above her, then landed gently on her shoulder. The crowd fell to their knees. It was the final sign from the gods. Adama had been chosen. She was queen. The village square, once a place of mockery and cruelty, now stood as a witness to the most extraordinary moment in Umudike's history. As the first rays of the morning sun painted the sky in shades of gold and crimson, the villagers gathered, their faces filled with awe and reverence. At the center of it all stood Adama, the orphan girl they had once ridiculed, the one they had dismissed as a nobody. Now, she was their queen. The high priest stood before Adama, holding the royal crown, a magnificent piece woven from gold and adorned with rare stones that sparkled in the sunlight. The same elders who had once doubted her now knelt before her, heads bowed in submission. Even the warriors, who had sought her downfall, stood in silent acceptance. One by one, the villagers fell to their knees. Men, women, and even the rich noble families who had tried to destroy her lowered their heads, their pride shattered by the will of the gods. And then, Zubaida stepped forward. The chief's daughter, the same girl who had tormented Adama, called her names, forced her to do the cruelest chores, now trembled before her. Her once proud face was streaked with tears, her eyes filled with shame. "Please," she whispered, falling to her knees. "Forgive me." A hush fell over the crowd. They all waited. Would Queen Adama seek revenge? Would she cast Zubaida out, humiliate her as she had once been humiliated? But Adama only looked at her for a long moment, her eyes unreadable. Then, she spoke. "I will not punish you, Zubaida." Zubaida's breath hitched, her body shaking with emotion. Adama continued, her voice calm but firm. "But you must learn humility. From this day forward, you will serve the people, not as a noble, but as one of them." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Zubaida's lips parted, her pride struggling against the weight of those words. But she knew this was the kindest punishment she could ever receive. She lowered her head. "I accept, my queen." The high priest raised his voice, his arms lifted toward the heavens. "The gods have spoken. The people have witnessed. Today, we crown the true ruler of Umudike." With a solemn grace, he placed the golden crown upon Adama's head. A cheer erupted through the crowd. The villagers clapped, stomped their feet, and chanted her name. Queen Adama. Queen Adama. Queen Adama. Drums pounded in rhythm, warriors lifted their spears in the air, and children danced, their laughter ringing through the village. Mama Ijibu stood at the edge of the crowd, her wrinkled face glowing with pride. "I told you, child," she whispered. "One day, they would bow before you." Adama turned, their eyes meeting, and for the first time in her life, she felt whole. She was no longer just an orphan girl. She was Queen Adama, the ruler of Umudike. And her reign was just beginning. Years passed, and Queen Adama's reign became one of wisdom, justice, and kindness. Under her rule, the village of Umudike flourished like never before. The fields grew greener, the rivers flowed clearer, and the people, once divided by wealth and status, now lived as one. No child was ever left to starve. No orphan was ever left to suffer. Adama made sure of it. She opened the palace gates to the poor, ensuring that no one was denied shelter. She created schools where children, rich and poor alike, could learn to read, write, and prepare for a future greater than their parents had imagined. She trained young girls to be leaders and warriors, proving that courage did not belong only to men. Even Zubaida, once her greatest tormentor, became a loyal servant to the people, dedicating her life to helping others. Through hard work and humility, she earned back her honor, not as a spoiled noble, but as a true daughter of Umudike. And Mama Ijibu, the old woman who had once whispered a prophecy into a young orphan's ears, lived long enough to see it come true. "You were always meant to wear the crown," she told Adama one evening as they watched the sunset over the village. Adama smiled. "Not because of my birth, Mama. But because of my heart." The years turned into decades. Adama's name became a legend, passed down from parents to children, from elders to warriors, from storytellers to dreamers. The villagers would gather under the great baobab tree, where the griots, the keepers of history, would tell her tale. Of the orphan girl who was mocked and abandoned. Of the brave young woman who faced every challenge with wisdom and heart. Of the queen who changed the fate of her people forever. And as the story always ended, the final words were spoken. They laughed at the orphan girl, but she became their queen.